Wow.
Welcome, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
Hi guys.
Welcome. There's still people coming in, so thanks for your patience. We have a record amount of people on this call for in our Autism Tree Lunch and Learn history. Over 50 people, 58.
Your your face.
Wonderful. This will be transcribed and recorded. We'd love to see all your smiling faces if you can. Thank you so much to everyone for being here for a very, very special lunch and learn. Autism Tree has been doing these since the pandemic hit. Can you believe it? 5 years ago, and this is our 155th lunch and learn. We did them weekly, and it's been just a way for us to stay connected, and keep our community inspired and moving forward. So I'm really grateful we are all here today together for our special lunch and learn with Garret Hoff. I wanted to thank Garret for being, I mean, we go way back. I've been with Autism Tree for 8 years, and it's been incredible to see the amount of growth and the dedication and leadership and advocacy that Garret has grown throughout that time. So we are very, very grateful to you, Garret, for being here and doing this special lunch and learn. A quick couple Zoom rules. Please mute yourself when you're not speaking. We recommend speaker view for presentation. Video sharing is optional, but we do love to see all of your smiling faces. And please type all questions and comments into the chat, I will moderate the chat as well. So you will be able to, you can ask any questions. Garret is also a co-host, so he can also, see the questions that you type in. We'll make sure that we have a Q&A at the end, where anybody can ask questions and converse. We love to be very, conversational in this. This is a time for all of us to connect. So we really recommend, you can unmute yourself at the end of the presentation, and we'll make sure that we get to all of your questions. A quick update from Autism Tree. We have had a record number of families who have come and joined our community. So if you're new, welcome. In all of last year, in 2024, we had over 806 brand new families join our community, which is a record for us. Half of that about 5 years ago. So it's incredible. The amount of families who have come in and have joined our programs. We're really happy to, help everyone navigate, this autism journey that you all are on, and a lot of adults as well too. So just this year as well. Now, as of today, we have 201 new families who have just filled out an intake form on our online, which is an online form that they fill out for their entire family, not just their child with autism, but the siblings and the parents as well, and what programs that they're interested in. So that's just people that that are just searching us up online. But of course, we would never ask anybody we just meet every single day to fill out an intake form. So that's just those new families. It's been incredible. We offer 20 annual programs for those of you who might not know. 13 here are in person, and across San Diego County, we do over 200 events a year under our 20 programs, and 13 are in person, four programs are hybrid, and 3 are virtual right now. So we've expanded our reach, which has been incredible, especially with our global neurodiversity conference that we've been doing over the past decade. This will be our 11th year this year. So welcome to all those families who might have been Zooming in from out of state. We're so grateful you're here too, and we're all here to learn from each other. We have 9 upcoming events coming up just this month, at the end of this month and in May. We are constantly adding new events and new community partners. So please check our social media for our announcements. We're very, very active on Facebook and Instagram, and even LinkedIn. So please follow us and to keep up to date for all of the great things that are happening here. We have events coming up next. Just this weekend, we have our Autism Tree cooking class for teens. It's part of our Teen Time program. Though we also kind of, anybody who wants to join, we love doing that. And then our adaptive dance class will be happening this Saturday as well. There's a few spots still open for our cooking class. Our dance classes, we partner with Tap Fever Studios and do 2 separate age groups, 6 to 12 and then 13 to 30. So those alternate weekends and have been really popular with our families. We also have our last USD baseball home game of the season coming up on May 4th. May the 4th be with you if you're a Star Wars fan. I love. So those are some of the events that are coming up. We still are, our whole community is welcome to RSVP. As if you don't already know, all of our programs are free of charge. All you have to do is RSVP and we'll see you there. We have 620 impact videos on our YouTube channel, which has been incredible. We have if you subscribe today, please, if you have it, it's a great way to stay connected. We post videos almost every week, and videos from our community, interviews and from our families, and also these 154 of these lunch and learns that we've been doing have all been posted and are on their own playlist. So you can go back and watch, and it's a really special resource for our community. And we've loved doing these lunch and learns since day one. And it's been, you can see the culture and the community of Autism Tree and the heart connection that threads everybody together in our community. So I highly recommend you watch if you are able to. And then, I have an exciting announcement. Autism Tree, if those of you who might know, we were in our exciting announcement is that we're moving into a new office for our families. We're so excited. We're going to be moving in on June 1st. For those of you who have been with us for the full 20 years, we had an office on Rosecrans and Nimitz, back in Point Loma for a while there, and for a decade. And we loved hosting family events like musical play groups and Lego play groups and parent mentor nights. We loved hosting those at our event, but then when COVID hit, we had to pivot. And of course, most of our events are happening out in the community anyway, so we downsized on our operational office. But now we are moving back into a big, spacious office, and we're excited because there's lots of parking spots. It's ADA accessible. We're on the 3rd floor. There's an elevator and bathrooms right outside of our office door. It's very quiet, wonderful, easy to find building, and it's a wonderful area in Rose Canyon, right off of the 5, next to Costco. So it's a great centralized area for our home base, and we're excited to be moving in there. So expect news for an opening office party that we will do in June. So without further ado, I want to pass it off to our executive director, Dana K. Hoff. She's also our co-founder, and she'll be introducing Garret.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm so excited to be here with you. And it's one of these rare days of my life where I feel speechless a little bit. But there's a lot of OGs on here, people that have been with our family even before Autism Tree. So I just want to say, I can't even imagine Autism Tree who would be here in our 22nd year without your love and support. Autism Tree, for people that are new to the foundation, was started when Garrett was diagnosed with autism. And right now, today, we're in our 22nd year, and then what our four core pillars are is to embrace every family, to connect every family to all the resources that we have, to empower each neurodiverse person that we're serving, and to help them create the best life possible. And today, of all days, I want to give Garrett all the time to kind of just share. I feel like the platform of the Lunch and Learn, what's really made it so special is that of all the 155 Lunch and Learns, there's one thread, and it's that there's the heart connection. Every single Lunch and Learn, if you were to listen to them, there's a heartbeat. There's a heartbeat for what we're doing here for our families. There's a heartbeat to make their lives better, and that's really how we operate every day at Autism Tree. Is we honestly are leading with love. We are making our decisions based on love, and that's something you'll feel if you haven't ever actually spent time within the Autism Tree community. You will feel that. And I would be remiss if I didn't say anyone from the Duke University community. It's an honor to have you here. I can't even find the words to say how much I've seen Garrett grow, his time at Duke Law School, and the work that he's doing and the impact that he's making. I just kind of want to pass it to him and ask him, gee, how do you feel today after your big day yesterday of having the op-ed go into Newsweek? I'm honestly just still feeling like I dreamed it. Want to pass it over to Garrett and thank each of you for being here today. And there's not even one cell in my body that doesn't feel emotion beyond words. Like I said, I feel speechless, and I'm just so grateful for the journey that we've been on together. If you're new, I hope you continue on the journey with us. And Garrett, thank you for being such a wonderful blessing every day in my life. I really love being your mother.
Thank you, Mom, and for the very, very sweet introduction. Today is this entire week has been really surreal. And before I go too far into how I feel, I want to give a brief little history lesson, because the office, bringing back the office is an amazing feat. And I just really want to give a lot of kudos to both you, Mom, and Rebecca for taking the time to bring the office back. The Lunch and Learns actually started out of core team meetings that we had in our old office, where we would come together as a community every week, hear about the events, hear about how people were doing, and come together and support our families, whether in triumph, whether in struggle, come together in community. And so it feels very surreal coming together in community with you all today and bringing together a lot of different communities that I've had in my life, whether it's been the Autism Tree community, and now members of the Duke Law community, Dean Ashcard, Professor Aguirre, Professor Gray. I see you're on here, and I really appreciate it. And so to come back to it, it feels really surreal. As a lot of you know, I've been on the East Coast collectively, COVID, some virtual, but ultimately 7 years, between 3 years at GW, George Washington University, 1 year working in DC, and now 3 years at Duke. And I feel confident, for the first time, really, authoritatively, with that level of authority, that it's all really been worth it. Because one thing that I saw at those core team meetings and in all the work that I've done at Autism Tree, both, in person or more recently virtually, it's been very, what I try to talk about in this paper are the truths that I saw, the experiences that I saw, your experiences, your feelings about what's going on in the world and how it affects you. And that those voices didn't really make it into the legal world. And they didn't make it into op-eds all that often. And so it's been such a tremendous privilege and such an honor to really learn the languages because they really are their own languages, speaking in talking politics and talking law. You have to really have so much context to be able to engage and to be able to take the truths you see, and articulate them in a way that, people with power and people with influence are really able to hear. And so it's been mind blowing. As the Duke Law folks know, we're in the middle of finals. I have a final on Friday, and I wrote this op-ed on the last day of classes. Um, the one that's in Newsweek. It wasn't really planned. It was a spur of the moment. This is happening. This is how I can talk about all the work that I've done. And it just feels really surreal because I probably worked on this paper for, basically since the day I stepped foot in law school. I had at least thoughts that I wanted to write about autism. Um, and even getting into the macro of this, the first draft of this paper was probably written about a year and a half ago, and was 60 pages. For those of you that have seen the whole paper, it's about 30. But what I really feel grateful for and what really makes this all feel surreal is one thing that I was very worried about when I got to Duke Law, and Professor Aguirre knows this really well because we had a lot of long chats. My 1L fall was trying to stay true to myself, stay true to my roots, stay true to the experiences that I've seen, and trying to represent those fairly and honestly and with integrity, while also trying to make sure that I protect myself, and have the education, have the experience that I want to have. Um, and I think this week, as much as any, has shown that I found that path. And so that's the part that really feels surreal. Because for the legal scholar, the folks that have read this paper and seen, I do a lot of things that are pretty unconventional in relation to legal scholarship. But I think from the response that I've seen, I think it's worked. But I really am excited to talk about the paper itself, and what I've put together, and kind of what I see as being a way to try and put some of the stories that I've seen in my time at Autism Tree, uh, into a language and into a way that the legal world of Duke Law uh, can contemplate. So with that, I'm going to share my screen here, and I thank you guys for bearing with me for 2 seconds. I know it might be just a little bit glitchy, so thank you for bearing with me on that. I have a presentation. I hope we can kind of keep questions until the end, only because for those of you who've read the paper, there's a lot going on here. And I'm going to try to do my best to do it all in a fairly concise way. So for starters, I want to just start with the paper is called It's Not So Simple, an examination of how the Internal Revenue Code fails to contemplate the economic realities of disabled individuals and their families. And the reason why I call it It's Not So Simple is because it's not just a question of costs. It's also a question of complexity. And I think as a lot of the parents and community members on this chat know, autism is complicated. If you've met one autistic person, you know exactly one autistic person. And that complexity has costs in and of itself. And I wanted to really try and put that front and center. And so what this paper is really about is the idea of what I call but-for costs. Ultimately, it's the costs that our families face. And I grouped it into kind of three basic categories. And there's more, and I go into it a lot deeper in the paper. But ultimately, there are upfront costs. Those are the costs that are incurred within the first few years of diagnosis. So, like in terms of my personal story, right? I get diagnosed, then my parents, get music therapy, they get speech, they get ABA. Those are costs that you're incurring within the first few years of diagnosis, within the first couple years. What are you paying to try and help your child be able to face the world now that they have this diagnosis? There's also long-term costs. One thing that we do know, even if the statistics aren't fully as developed as you would hope, is that people with autism face challenges finding work, and being able to sustain their livelihoods and make a living for themselves. And ultimately, that cost ends up coming back on the families. And so there are a lot of times very real long-term costs that will need to be paid for down the line due to an individual's disability. So one example is like a group home. If a child isn't able to work as an adult, how are you going to care for that individual? And then the third cost, and this one has even less data around it, but I really want to make this point, especially when we think about labor economics, or what I kind of call family costs. And so the idea that ultimately, now that you have a child that you need to support, and specifically support in, obtaining therapies and a group home, and having access to these services that they need to better be able to face the world, that imposes costs in terms of, right, maybe you need to go move for those services. Maybe you can't go and take that new job because they don't provide health insurance in the way that your current job does. And it also long-term stress too. There's been a lot of great literature about the cost of long-term caregiving. Most of that has been discussed in the context of senior citizens and maybe like a parent. But I would strongly imagine that those same types of health costs are applicable here as well. And so we're going to come back to that slide. So keep these costs in mind. Give me a quick second. Sorry about this. But basically, there's a few different areas of the tax code that can potentially help. The main current option we have is the medical expense deduction. So section 213. There we go. And so basically the idea is that for your medical expenses that aren't covered by insurance, everything over 7.5% is deductible. And I want to really emphasize that the reason why this exists is because Congress believes that spending on medical expenses past a certain point creates a hardship that should be reflected when calculating income. Keep that in mind as we keep talking about this, because that our families face a hardship, in having to incur all of these but-for disability costs. But 213 doesn't really create a lot of quality opportunities for our families, the autism community, or a lot of other disabled students to really have that hardship recognized in the tax code, even though they're actually facing it. So coming back to it, just to really make clear what the 7.5% of adjusted gross income barrier means. So let's say your income, your after-tax income, your adjusted gross income is $100,000. You can only start deducting for medical expenses on the $7,501st. From then on, that's deductible. But you have to spend 7.5% of your income on medical expenses first before you can start getting the deduction. And the other piece, the one that I think really shows a lot of what I'm trying to get at with this examination of the tax code, is it must be incurred primarily for alleviation of a specific mental or physical defect. So you can't deduct for things that help you in general. They have to be tied back to the specific ailment. So one example that often gets used a lot, and this one probably makes sense to more people, is vacations, right? You go to that spa trip, and that makes you feel a lot better. No dice on that deduction, unless you can really prove it is for a specific thing. And what we're going to be talking about more is the idea of schooling in a specific atmosphere believed to be conducive to treatment. Because I believe, and I think there's a lot of evidence that we'll go into more, that education is really where a lot of the anti-disability bias of the tax code really starts to show up. So here is the basic standard for the deduction. It's from a case called Jacobs v. Commissioner. And you basically need to prove two things. First, that you have let's use a disease that exists. And autism counts, it's defined, the idea of mental or physical disease or defect, that language is expansive. And the second and the harder one is that the payment is directly related to the diagnosis. And the tax code can get really strict about this because if it's what's called a dual purpose expense, so something that is, even if it is totally tied to autism, but it also can help for something else. So like think headphones to help with sensory issues at a baseball game, right? That helps in one sense, but you might just need the headphones anyway. that could be considered dual purpose. And so then you need to prove that the spending is an essential element of treatment and that it wouldn't have been otherwise incurred but for medical reasons. And so I would argue that you'll see that this can be pretty strict. But how you ultimately prove this is by introducing evidence. And so, right, if you have those types of like brochures saying like, oh, we administer, we give care to autistic people, we're specially trained, and you can show that the services are distinct, that's how you can ultimately prove what a medical expense is. The thing is for special education, it's even stricter. Um, and this kind of comes back to a general bias in the code about they don't want people to be able to deduct private education generally. But they do allow one narrow exception through a treasury regulation. So that's basically how the IRS interprets the code. And this has been in place since 1960. And basically, you can gain the deduction if you can prove both that the attendance at the school is more to alleviate the ailment than necessarily the education, and that you can prove that the education is incidental to medical care. So basically, you can get a deduction for special education only if the actual education part is secondary. And this can lead to some pretty egregious decisions. So this is Fay v. Commissioner. This is from 1981. And if you see on the screen, I've listed out, this is the only place where I've directly quoted my paper in this slideshow, that there's this whole long list of things that the family did before they put their child in private school. The children at issue in this case were in a free school. They were diagnosed with learning disabilities. And the parents did all of this. And this is probably something that feels very familiar if you're just looking at this paragraph of all the things they did. They tried to lobby the school system. They went to all sorts of doctors. Is this deductible, the private school that they went to? No. And the reason why, after doing all that, even though they absolutely did their best, I realize that you can't supersede the bottom, is that the school's raison d'etre, and yes, that is actual language from the case, is that they're a Montessori school. Now, they were able to get something. So the school had separate fees for the disability services, about $1,800, but the tuition was like 30 grand. That was deductible. But the actual tuition, even though the only reason why the kids were at the school in the first place was disability, that tuition they still had to get taxed for making those payments and incurring those costs. And so the special school doctrine in Fay really come to three main implications. One, you don't want to be in dual purpose land. Dual purpose expenditures are not favored, especially when it comes to education. But for costs, even when they work in other places, they are not deductible for private special education. And the third one, and the one that I would really hold on to, is that a separate identifiable fee for services, for disability-related services specifically, is more likely to be deductible than just a straight cost. And I want to make clear the historical context of why I see this as being a problem, because ultimately I know a lot of people can say, oh, there's the public schools, they're an option. Remember, the Treasury regulation was written in 1960. Even though Fay was in 1981, the tax court judge that wrote the opinion in Fay had been on the bench since the 50s. And even what's now IDEA, the precursor to IDEA, it's called the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, the EAHCA, was passed in 1975. And when we look at the history, all of that was written in a time when special education was a privilege. It was not viewed as a right. Prior to 1965, only 3 states required educational programs for disabled children. By 1975, 2 of those 3 states had class action litigation relating to those states' failure to provide services. And that spirit of promises being made in law and not being sustained in practice has been the history of public special education. It doesn't mean that you can't get services, but we all know that there's a very real fight that you have to have with the school district, with the insurance company, but really with the school district in a public education setting to get services. And that imposes costs on us in a way that other families don't have to face. And that's been by design. That is the point that I am making here, is that ultimately, since the EAHCA was passed, there was a rateable reduction included. When they passed it, Congress members on both sides knew that it wasn't going to be fully funded. And it's never gotten close. I think the if I remember right, the percentage is around 40% of public education, special education funding that the federal government has actually provided when they wrote that mandate. And so we have this very long history of students with special education needs either needing to supplement what the public schools are giving or going to private education. And in both of those cases, those costs have not been viewed as tax deductible. But I think it ultimately comes back to the idea that these laws that govern what we are doing today, were written in a time where special education wasn't valued, where it was viewed as a privilege, where it wasn't viewed as a right. And so when we get into the reforms part, I think it's important to think that we need to try and start from a point where special education is a right and think about how our laws need to conform to that idea, because they don't. Now I want to talk a little bit about a much more modern provision of the code. So this is Section 529A. And it's very under the radar. I think a lot of folks in the disability community know about it more. But when I actually was writing this note, and I'd asked, my tax professors, oh, how do families deal with this? And when I started going into 529A, they hadn't really heard about it. They'd heard of Section 529, the college savings plans, right? People are pretty familiar with that idea that you can put money into an account where the savings accrue tax-free, and then you can use it to pay for college. But ABLE was only passed in 2014. And it actually only exists because there was a dad named Stephen Beck. He had a daughter with Down syndrome. There's a picture of the Becks right there. And he was finding in trying to save for his daughter's long-term care, that if there was more than $2,000 in savings in the account, the daughter would lose eligibility for certain federal benefits. And so that led to the passage of the ABLE accounts, which sets up ABLE programs. And so the idea is that you can put money into an account, and these savings accounts are monitored by the states. You do it through state programs. So CalABLE, I know a lot of folks in the Autism Tree community are familiar with. And ultimately, the money in that account, can be saved, accrue tax-free, and then you can spend that money without having to pay tax on it for qualified disability expenses. And this is a much broader definition than medical expenses. It includes education, housing, transportation, employment training. It also includes health, but it is a much broader view of what people with disabilities need in terms of support and living a more full life, one that's out in the world. At the same time, there are some very real limits to deductibility. Some of that's because it was modeled on 529, but it has real consequences. The biggest one being that the contribution limit, so how much you can put in a year, is tied to the exclusion of the gift tax, which is one that people probably don't hear about a lot because it is pretty high. But if you give somebody more than, I think the number right now is 19,000 a year, then you have to pay tax on it. Now the gift tax, I think one important thing to understand about the gift tax is actually you have a lifetime credit for the gift tax. That's very high. I think that it's like 7 million. And then you only have to start paying tax after the 7 million. But here in 529A, you just can't put money in. Like you are tapped out at 19 grand a year. There's been a very limited raise of it that's actually set to expire this year for working beneficiaries. But even then, It only raises it to the prior year federal poverty line amount for a single person household, which I think is like 20 to 25 grand. So it's not that big of a boost. Um, Again, the money you put into the account that gets taxed. It's only the money that comes out that isn't taxed. And the other real, limitation is that the states maintain pretty close oversight of ABLE accounts. So you have to basically have a bank account. The state is monitoring it. And there's limitations on how you can direct the investment. And in addition, you have to prove to the state that you have a disability. So it's pretty tightly regulated. And it's limited on what you can do. So now coming back a little bit, I'm just going to move this. Oh, perfect. Up here, you'll see why. So this is our slide from earlier, right? We had upfront costs, we had long-term costs. And now we're going to talk a little bit about how this maps back on. So 213, the medical expense deduction, long-term costs, it doesn't really work because, ultimately it's about long-term care. That isn't necessarily long-term medical care unless the placement is in a medical institution. And there's some really strict cases about the medical expense deduction being denied for situations where even though medical care is kind of being provided, the person isn't in an institutional setting. So not much relief is going to come under 213 for long-term costs. For upfront costs, maybe a little bit. But again, we talked about how the definition is pretty strict. You have that 7.5% adjusted gross income barrier. So you might be able to get something for those upfront costs just because the numbers can end up getting so big. But even still, it's complicated to actually get. And you have to do a lot of work to make it happen. So then we have ABLE. Long-term costs, ABLE's pretty good, right? You can use it to save for the costs. You don't have to pay taxes on the money coming out. Over time, the account should earn interest. So that actually works decently well. Where ABLE isn't helpful is with the upfront costs. Because ultimately, you're still paying the tax and the contributions. And if you're rating the account to then pay those upfront costs, the savings aren't going to happen as quickly. It isn't, the real benefit is in the savings. And so we're going to come back to what I propose in terms of ABLE. But keep in mind that ABLE really only works for this corner. And ideally, we would want something that helps on both sides. And we're really missing the upfront costs. And so the reason why that really matters is that ultimately, the data that I found is that 60% of the lifetime, but for costs, the costs related to autism are on the upfront side. Doesn't mean that the long-term costs aren't significant, but ultimately, where a lot of those costs are actually being incurred are those immediate costs that aren't easily saved for and have less relief in the code than the ones that you can plan for. And I think that is an area that really needs to be addressed. So now to try and put this into practice, I have 2 tax tips here. So the first one, this comes back to Faye and trying to apply this, is trying to identify the cost of the medical component and deduct. So what you're seeing on the screen right now is there's 2 schools. Folks in San Diego might be familiar with both of them. On the left, we have the Newbridge School. It's one of the only schools in San Diego that is focused on serving students with dyslexia. On the other side, the Maria Montessori School. It's a Montessori school, right? The student-teacher ratios are similar. They serve students in the same years. They're in the same county. The tuitions are different. Newbridge's is higher. Newbridge's is 21.5. Maria Montessori is about 16.5. So then what you can do is, because now you've made this comparison of these 2 schools that are similar, but one does special education and one doesn't. And the one with special education is more expensive. What you can then argue effectively is that the non-special education school, the Montessori school, that's the value of private education for the area. And since the special education school, Newbridge, is $5,000 more, that is a medical expense. And everything that I've read suggests that that is a comparison that will fly. And so that's still something. I mean, ultimately, in a best case scenario, you're able to deduct $5,000 on private education when the code generally doesn't let you do that. But again, you still have to be on the right. You have to still be beyond the 7.5 gross income barrier. And you have to do all this work And even then, there's still the small possibility that the court doesn't, the IRS or the tax court doesn't buy this comparison. And where I wouldn't do this comparison is, let's say you tried to compare the Newbridge School to a school here in Durham, North Carolina, and maybe that school costs 10 grand. And you tried to deduct for 11,000. That probably wouldn't work because it's not the same area. And so there's limitations on how you can make that comparison. And the other big limitation on it is it only works if there's no separate fee. So I know a school that people in San Diego are familiar with is known as the Winston School. They have separate fees for their disability related services. The fees are tax deductible, but Winston's 30 grand a year tuition, no dice. The other big tax tip, I've already pressed upon it a little bit, is opening an ABLE account. So this is a chart from Minnesota's 529 college savings plan, but it's ultimately the same logic. The money that you put in, it grows over time. And so if you make that investment early, you allow it to save up and accrue. An ABLE account is a very useful way to allow those savings to build up tax-free. So now we're kind of getting into the part about ideas that might help. And I want to just be really clear that I kind of have three different ideas, and they're different levels and different degrees of difficulty, but that all of them are somewhat limited. And I'll get into that more at the end. But without further ado, I'm just going to jump in. So the first one is the idea of repealing the special school doctrine and basically overturning Fay. So right here, this is how I would change the Treasury regulation. And if you notice, a lot of the words that are crossed out, specifically one at the bottom, it reads like it was written in 1960. And I think that this section is pretty overdue to be rewritten anyway, and I would hope that it would be a minor regulatory change. Theoretically, if somebody was really invested in this should only take about 6 months to do. Now, the trade-off of this, the limitation is that ultimately, you're still stuck in Section 213 land. And so even if this broadens the ability, this gets you back to that kind of Jacobs v. Commissioner, but for standard without more, you're still stuck in 213. You're still stuck having to make these justifications about how supporting your child relates to a medical institution. And ultimately, I think what that really ends up having the consequence of is it pushes families towards medical institutions and medical solutions. And I think one thing I tried to at least hint at in my piece, it's something I certainly believe, is that and it's something that I say more explicitly in the paper, is that ultimately when you medicalize the problems that our families face, it allows the rest of society to basically be off the hook and not have to engage with the consequences of how it treats autistic people, how it treats families, and the economic challenges that families are facing, because they're not just medical issues. I think we all know that on this chat. A lot of people on the outside of it don't. So then I think the solution right now that I think makes the most sense for the moment is revising 529A to strengthen ABLE accounts. And ultimately how I would do it is I would get rid of the contribution limit. I think it should be unlimited. I think the contributions should be exempt from gift tax, and I would make them deductible. So here's at least how I would tweak them themselves. I go into it a lot more in the paper. But ultimately, the benefit that I see here is now you avoid the 7.5% gross income barrier. Now you have deductibility for special education and a lot of those expenses that I think really matter to our families and really matter in terms of actually preparing autistic people and disabled students for the world. And it also helps unstretch the idea dollar, because, right, if more families can ultimately utilize private alternatives and have a tax system that helps them do so, it helps take the pressure off of public special education funding, at least a little bit. Now, admittedly, that distribution is going to be uneven. We'll get into that in a minute. But what I like about it theoretically is that it at least places the point of hardship, right? We were talking earlier about what hardship should be recognized at. Congress put it at 7.5% of the medical expense deduction. I think for disability, it should be 1 cent. Because ultimately, disability is a protected class. It's not something that you can control. And so I think this solution recognizes, um, that the financial challenges that families are facing related to disability are more often than not a form of economic discrimination, as opposed to, a legitimate incurrence of services, to put it that way. Uh, and so now I want to really emphasize the limitations. So a lot of what we've been talking about today is ultimately about taking deductions that are not the standard deduction. So when a lot of people do their taxes, right? You have your W-2 in front of you, like I talked about in the introduction. Um, the real challenge is identifying your income, and then you just take the standard deduction, um, and that gives you the number at the end. Close to 90% of taxpayers do that. So, right, we have 44 people on this call. Uh, roughly, oh wow, my math brain is not fully rolling right now, but we'll do 40, right? 36 out of 40 are going to be doing the standard deduction. So we're talking about maybe 4 or 5 people might actually find that part helpful. And so if you had a system where ABLE made it easier to deduct for disability expenses, now all of a sudden you're having to prove all those disability expenses. You have this state oversight now, and you're foregoing the standard deduction, right? We just made taxes more complicated. And in addition, we also effectively put this barrier in to get this relief. You have to go and open a bank account. And so the studies that I saw suggest that 5% of Americans are all unbanked, and that's even higher in communities of color. And so I think that's another piece to really be aware of, is that even if we get this tax relief, even if, and I think ABLE would provide an effective mechanism to get families with disabled students tax relief, it puts burdens on those families, and it probably only helps the families that really have the resources to be able to access the benefits. I still think there's at least a trickle-down effect in that it should theoretically put less stress on some of the system where vulnerable students with disabilities and their families also use. But I think it's important to really have that discussion up front, because very few tax policy solutions are going to be, as I put it in the paper, magic bullets. There's just a limit on it. So with that, thank you guys for listening to me talk. I know I threw a lot at you. I know there's a lot going on in this paper. I really hope you found it helpful or interesting, and I'm really happy to take questions, whether about this or anything else. Okay, let's see. Now I can come back a little bit.
Thank you, Garrett. I do want to open it up to anybody who has questions. You can either type it in the chat, or you can raise your virtual hand and I can call on you and you can unmute as well.
Oh, I think that's Sandy, I think, has her hand raised. Go right ahead.
Go ahead, Sandy.
Now, I know in California, you have to do a scholarly writing in order to graduate from law school. And you have a couple people on that are listening from Duke. Certainly this should qualify for your scholarly writing.
Yeah, so thank you. And so actually, to give a slight story time, so scholarly writing is, so you do have a requirement to do a scholarly writing project. And actually, I can really nerd out about this because I'm in charge of the internal note process for my journal at Duke. But I actually chose to take a scholarly writing course, which is really kind of the serious one. For if you're really serious about trying to get your note published, you take scholarly writing. I had a fantastic professor who will probably be watching this recording that I did it with, and I got feedback from the class. I had to submit a lot of different drafts. So I did it as part of that course originally. I kind of had that plan, and then I kind of sat on it for a little bit, and then my journal agreed to publish the actual note, and then I went back and have been making probably another 2 to 3 rounds of revisions this past spring running up to publication last week. So it's been in the works for a while. But yes, I did it for a class. And I got a very nice message from my professor for that class when I shared the paper.
I want to thank you. I got a little tearful myself. I've known you since you were 8 years old. And then when you said you were graduating from high school, and we opened a lot of doors with Department of Rehab and income that they could provide for families with autism for college or vocational school. But it gives hope to families when they can see that you don't just put this child in a group home to live out their life, because that's what I was told when Eric was 5.5, because he was never going to get any better. And Cal Western, they thought about it and then they finally let him in. And so I want to thank you for being a beacon of hope for all these families that are watching with your family's Autism Tree project, and for letting them see that this really is doable, that each person is an individual, and one size is not going to fit all. And it's not always just genetics. There's a lot of features, but it gives them hope that going from the screaming child, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So thank you, and thank you for your presentation.
Oh, well, thank you, Sandy. And I want to thank Eric too. I know he isn't on. So to give everybody a little bit of context, Eric is also Sandy's son. Eric is on the autism spectrum and also a lawyer who has passed the California bar.
36 going on 13, he says.
And he was somebody who was a tremendous source of inspiration to me as I was going through a lot of my journey. Because and Dean Ashcard knows this well. I didn't really think autistic people went to law school until I heard about Eric. I've come to find out that actually isn't true. There's a lot of autistic people in law school. They just aren't willing to put themselves out there in the way that Eric has and that I have. And so I really thank you and Eric for putting themselves out there. I mean, I especially when I was thinking about writing the op-ed that I did for Newsweek, and about, going out there and working and being professionals and running. Eric's a great marathon runner.
Yeah.
You and Eric were definitely on my mind.
Yeah, he does obstacle course racing now, and he lost fine and gross motor skills, but now he's jumping over fire pits, and that's his fun thing. Spartan racing.
So I want to read a few things from the chat, a few amazing people who have written in. I don't want to miss it. Make sure Garrett hears it. So one of our moms said, Elvira, thank you so much for this. I've had several struggles and never heard of the ABLE Act. I'll have to look into it. It's taken a total of roughly 8 years with my 9-year-old daughter. With that, I do want to share that we have done a whole Lunch and Learn series, I think about 6 or 7 Lunch and Learns that are dedicated specifically to talking about CalAble. And so I would recommend going on our YouTube channel and you can watch those as well. And I'm really glad that Garrett went into even more detail with that today. And then Miriam wrote, thank you, Garrett. I really enjoyed learning from you today and over the years. Your insight is far reaching. You truly are a beacon of hope, like Sandy said. And Jana said, Garrett, your advocacy is absolute brilliance. Thank you for your hard and thoughtful work. Zeus said, great work, buddy. Keep advocating and keep that voice strong. Yes, we need more people like you. And then your professor, Aguirre. Congratulations, Garrett. Great work. Looking forward to celebrating you and your family at graduation.
Well, thank you for all the incredibly kind comments. Again, it's been such a surreal week, and I'm so glad that we've had this time together, and that you've been along for what's been a wild ride. I was telling Rebecca before this whole fully got started, if you'd asked me a week ago today whether I knew that I was going to be in Newsweek, talking about our issues and getting to check to my paper. I definitely wouldn't have believed that. And so, it's remarkable how the world turns sometimes. And I'm grateful that we've been getting to share this turn together, and I'm excited to see what turn comes next.
I'm
Garrett,
a,
ask everyone to stay for a photo with you.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I was gonna say is
Yeah, we
don't be
gotta have this
remiss to not
memory together.
And I love Dr. Troner's note as well. Thank you, Dr. Troner. She said, Garrett, your presentation was fantastic. So much information will be extremely helpful for a lot of people. I personally am really grateful that we recorded this. And please, we will be posting this at the end on our YouTube channel at the end of the day. So feel free to share it out with your networks. We'll also share it on Autism Tree. And she
And
said,
if people can show your awesome faces, we love to see your face just for a moment.
we love to do it a group picture. You are welcome to be a part of it. We'd love for you to be a part of it. Okay. Wonderful. Go ahead and big smiles, and I'll take a screenshot. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Cheese. Okay, I want to make sure I got one more person that added in last time. So let's do it again. Ready?
Okay.
1, 2, 3, cheese. Wonderful.
I wanted to just add one thing if I could. Our chairman of the board, Todd Hoff, is on here, Garrett's father, and I wanted to let you say anything you'd like, Todd. I'm so happy you were able to make it.
Absolutely. Hey, Garrett, you leave me speechless so many times. Incredible presentation. I think what's powerful about today is how diverse the group that joined to watch the presentation. Doris Troner, pediatric neurology chair at Children's Hospital. Without her diagnosis, your journey would have been stymied because we didn't have a diagnosis. I saw two of our prior supervisors for your therapy program were on today. They've seen you since you were 3 years old, and to see you mature into the young professional you are, you're inspiring for so many of us, and even me as your father. Super proud of what you've done today. Can't wait for your graduation and the changes you're going to make in the world moving forward. I've said it many times. I've never met a child who was so passionate, articulate, and fearless. That you have the courage to be you all the time. And that's a great accomplishment to have inside of you as a character. Keep being you. You're going to change the world. Love you and have a great day.
Love you, Dad. And again, I just want to say thank you to everybody who came. It's been so amazing to see so many people from so many different parts of my journey, from Dr. Troner and Miriam, all the way up to the Duke Law folks on that are getting to see, the quote unquote more complete product. And I look forward to continuing to build and continuing to grow, and to do that with all of you, and to make it easier for the next person.
Thank you, Garrett. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a wonderful
care,
rest
guys.